Hello, and welcome to Hedgehog's Fanfiction Time, where I read stories based on my original fiction. So this is not going to be a regular thing. Don't worry, I will not be regularly reading fanfiction of my stories on my channel, because that's a weird slippery slope. But, however, my good friend and patron Aedrah recently used his patron request to ask that I read a story he wrote for his own character, Valen, who is canon to Aedrah Valley. Again, due to patron shenanigans. And he sent me the story, and I was very impressed by it. So I figured that I would honor that request, and I would read it on the channel. So without further ado, here is the first deal. Valen didn't know where he was. This wasn't a common occurrence, but it was an uncommon one, so he didn't really mind. Now, if he had ended up somewhere he wasn't trying to go, that would be a rare occurrence, and if he somehow ended up exactly where he wanted to be, well, only then would he start to worry. Valen liked getting lost. The only issue that came up was he usually couldn't. He knew almost every single square foot of land within 50 miles of Aedrah Valley. Every house, every store, every tree, every single clump of dirt. He had explored and mapped it out meticulously, inch by inch. He found every secret he could. And yet, here he was. Aedrah Valley had a tendency to do that. You look away for a second, and something changes. A door moved 3 centimeters to the left, a window an inch up, a building exists where there wasn't one, and anything in between. Most of the residents didn't notice, too caught up in their day-to-day to truly pay attention to minutia. Where was he going with this? Ah, right. He's lost. And that's a novel concept to him. Valen looked around, taking note of some of the smaller shifts that had taken place, but still not recognizing anything. He knew where he was before this, and yet, here he was, unknowing of this place. Was he dreaming, potentially? A quick slap to his face confirmed he wasn't, and upon looking around again, there was an entrance that wasn't there the last time. He stepped through it, and found himself on the opposite side of the road to his favorite people-watching spot in the entire town, the Smiling Goat, run by the grinning demon himself. And yes, he knew what he was. Hard not to when he knew almost everything about this town. And he wouldn't leave until he knew everything. What was he doing again? Right, people-watching. Valen took a breath, and everything seemed to fade around their edges. The sharpness of the buildings, the harshness of the sun, even the colors had started to fade in his peripheral. And then he walked across the street. The place wasn't too busy right now, but Valen hesitated a second before he walked in anyways. Everything started to fade in for a moment, before it all went back to being slightly fuzzy. He found his usual corner table, 1 chair only, and sat down, his mind already cataloging who was here and bringing the patterns he knew them by to the forefront. He had asked people who could read minds what it sounded like when he did this, and the only responses he ever got were screaming or the person passing out. Sometimes it was both. They all called it overstimulating. He called it fun. No one noticed him at his table. No one ever did. He liked it like that. The Smiling Goat was the best place to just watch. No distractions. Well, actually, the distractions were at the point, but if you actively seek out the distractions, does that still make them distractions? Valen's tempted to say no. They'd have to be unexpected to be classified as a distraction, but then he's actively seeking the unexpected, because that's how he learns new things, but that means that they aren't unexpected, and his mind drew his eyes to the door opening. That was unexpected. No one was due in for at least another 5 minutes, but lo and behold, someone new was walking in. Someone Valen hadn't seen before. Someone that looked familiar, but he couldn't place where from. He could feel the itch starting. He needed to know absolutely everything about this person. Who they were, where they came from, why they were here, what brought them here. He had to. Everything was still faded when Valen stood up. He made his way over to the new person, ignoring the grin from the only person who could see him. He got close and inspected the fresh blood. They were 5 feet 5.5 inches, hunched over in a way that meant they were nervous. Hadn't been here before. There'd been some air of familiarity amongst them if they had. Their eyes were bright blue. The brightest blue, Valen would say, at least as far as eyes were concerned. He felt the itch get worse. That shade of blue didn't occur naturally in humans. They were 3 shades brighter than the brightest blue in human eyes he had ever seen. The pale white hair corroborated that idea. No smell, so no fresh dye, and the roots were white as well. White as fresh snow. The freshest snow he knew. From a place long gone, in a time long past. His mind went through everything this person could be. The closest was a Yuki Onna, but the hair wasn't black, and they actually had a passably human skin complexion. Valen nodded. Child of one, then. Too other to be human, but too human to be other. He couldn't think of a nearby Yuki Onna to Edie Valley, so either they had traveled a very long way to get here, or he had missed something. And Valen hadn't missed anything in years. Not since. Valen's mind nudged him out of his thoughts to the sight of the person moving towards the grinning demon, steps hurried and gaze constantly shifting between the patrons they could see. Valen walked up behind her, stopping before he'd bumped into her. His ears decided now was a good time to not process sound, but he could read lips well enough. He'd have to work on that. He had enough time to perfect it. The gist he got was that the demon wasn't surprised to see them and that they wanted to make a deal. Most that knew what lived here usually only came here to make deals. It was how things worked. The demon led them to the back. Valen didn't follow. This was one of the ways he got any entertainment. He would make a bet on what deal the person would make. He was always split between 2. It was almost uncanny how perfectly he was divided. He had gotten used to it. About 10 minutes passed before the demon and the person came back out. They looked like a stereotypical, nondescript human, and Valen briefly felt a twinge of sadness before he saw something fizzle out of existence, and then they stood there. Their hair was black, their lips blue as ice, and their complexion as pale as the white their hair had been. They left the smiling goat, head held high, a direct contrast to how they had entered, and Valen felt more than saw as the demon walked up behind him. "Well?" he asked, the grin on his face stretching wider. Valen felt relief that his ears were working again. "Do you want to make that deal yet?" "You know the answer already," Valen responded. He felt the air rustle as the demon shook his head, a chuckle escaping him. "I know, it's not every day I get one of his dealers walk through here, make a deal with me, and then tell me that he'll make another deal with me in the future. I think that's a first." "You'd be surprised how often firsts happen. They lose their appeal." "So that's a no, then." Valen tilted his head to stare at the grinning demon and blinked slowly, his expression unchanging. The demon laughed, turning around and making his way back towards the bar. Valen had already decided when that deal would be made. It wouldn't be made for a long while, because he knew what would happen when he did. It would be his last thing he ever learned. For now, though, he did have the first deal with this demon he had made, the ability he uses now to vanish from people's perception. All he had to give up was his calm. That was fine. Calm had no use among the mad. He hadn't had a calm time since before that day, so many centuries ago. The day of his first deal. Valen felt the fatigue eat away at him, but he couldn't stop now. He had to keep going. It had been about 16 hours since he had started, and he was so close. Just a few more chants, a little bit more blood, and... The lines lit up. Valen dropped silent, beginning to wrap his hand to stem the blood flow and sipping at a cup of water he had placed by his side when he had started. It was the first time in the 16 hours that he had used it. He watched as the circle glowed red, the inverted pentacle glowing along with it. He absently noted that it quite resembled the face of an animal found in the mountains before the lights grew blinding. By the time he could see again, there was a humanoid standing on the inverted pentacle, constrained to the inside of the circle.
"Why have you summoned me, mortal?"
The humanoid's face was impossible to make out. There were dark spots in his vision obscuring any identifying features, apart from a single, outside point of the spot, showing it at least had white hair. He knew he had the right one. "I wish to make a deal, mighty Bake."
"A deal? You summon me, one of the most powerful beings, the Lord of Madness, the creator of discord, to make a deal?"
"Wait. Hold on. Could you repeat those titles?" Valen scribbled them down as quickly as he could, before pausing and looking back up at him. "Never mind, got them all. What's discord? I know the term discordance, but discord sounds important."
"What do you want?"
Bake's voice echoed in his mind, stopping his wandering thoughts. He felt like he was facing the world's worst predator, and he was its favorite prey to hunt. Valen's scribbling stopped, and he set down his writing utensil and notes. I want enough time to learn everything. Valen looked Bake in the eyes as close as he could. He knew he had that look in his eyes, the one that drove people away. They called it madness. He called it a passion.
Well now, that's a nice look you got there. Enough time to learn everything. What does that mean to you?
The demon leaned closer to the circle's edge, and Valen could start to make out horns on the side of his head. I would stop aging. I would never get sick again. I would never need food or water or sleep or to breathe again. Any wounds I may suffer are healed instantly, and this stays as is until I learn absolutely everything. And I do mean everything. Valen could feel his skin growing colder and colder as he spoke, but he pushed through it. This was but a step to his goal. It was a temporary discomfort. Bake grinned, though how Valen knew that was anyone's guess.
That's a high bar there, friend. Sounds like a wish for immortality. How long do you think that would take you?
A century, maybe 2, if there's something particularly challenging. The look hadn't disappeared. Valen knew he was close to the path to the final discovery, but the time he lived in was so war-torn that he didn't want to take any chances. He wanted to make sure he finished his life's work before he died. A century or 2 is a reasonable expectation for him. But Bake? Bake laughed. At him. It was the most soul-chilling sound he had ever heard. It raised the hairs all over his body. He started trembling, and worst of all, it echoed. In his head. Even after the outside laugh had stopped, the one inside his brain didn't.
That's the funniest thing I've heard in years. Tell you what, I'm willing to do that deal with you, but the price is steep. It's...
My soul. Yes, I'm aware. Valen waved him off, trying to calm himself down and take control. Bake didn't acknowledge that Valen had spoke.
Your knowledge of everything.
Valen froze. His knowledge? That went against everything he had read. The deals were always for the soul. There hadn't been any records of non-soul prices. Could he even agree to this? Everything he had learned, everything he had worked for, the whole reason for this deal, would be ripped away? And for what? The time needed to finish his great work? It would take so much more time. But time would be something he'd have in abundance. One more condition, then. I want to remember everything I learn after this deal is done for as long as I live. I can never forget anything.
Well now, that's not what the deal was.
Valen could feel himself start to shiver. The bloodlust coming from this demon. It was nothing he had ever felt before. He felt himself freeze before he remembered what he was here for. He would have this deal. His eyes must have gotten that look in them again because Bake had started laughing. Again. The bloodlust receded, just enough to allow Valen to focus on the demon. He kept laughing.
That's amazing. I haven't had anyone try to change a deal in progress in centuries. And that's how I like it. If you're not mad enough to make a deal with me, I won't deal with you. That look? Ha! I'll allow it. You'll have your perfect memory, but in exchange, I want to try something. Let's call it a wild card price. It could be anything. It could even be a boat. If you'll agree, something will happen.
I want to remember this deal, then. The last change. I want my first and only memory after this of the deal. That's my last one. Bake just kept laughing. Valen didn't know if this was going according to plan, but as long as he completed his life's work, he wouldn't care.
Last one from me, then. Your drive for knowledge will become your obsession, your want into a need, your passion into true madness. It will be what drives you, no matter what.
Deal. And with that, Valen felt like every single tiny part of his being was being torn apart. His memories, his knowledge were scraps of paper in a windstorm, being funneled up and away from him. His body was magma, melting away what remained after the wind, anything that made him him. And then he woke up in a desert. Those few minutes from before the ritual started were where his memory starts. He didn't try to fix them, get them back, because as he had soon learned, it was a fool's errand. You couldn't retrieve what never existed. He had kept track of when his day of appearing in the desert was, and eventually came to the conclusion that he had woken on February 29th, 271 BCE, according to the current in-use calendar. He watched as empires rose and fell. As people changed, it remained the same. He read through the entirety of the library at Alexandria, and when he had finished, burned it down. That was probably why Bacche had even deigned to speak with him. The chaos he had inside him. He spent the next few decades recreating each and every scroll, book, and object that were in the library, and made his own. That actually spawned his favorite activity. It was simply the process of recreating books from his memory that he had read. It satisfied the itch, usually. He doesn't write the same book twice, though. It was quite a painful experience. Where was he? Oh yes, right. His reminiscent from the start. Well, the start of him, at least. The old Valen, the one that made the deal, was dead. He got what he wished for, and he paid the price. And now Valen exists as he currently is. For better, or for worse, who's to say? He can feel his madness start to bubble up, more volatile than ever since he traded his calm. He doesn't mind, though. It's what he's alive for. It's what drives him. Valen got up from his table and exited the building. He walked back into that alleyway across the road from the bar and watched as things changed around him, as they did when he had first left. He simply stood there, taking in every single change, letting the itch scratch itself. He didn't care about the time passing, nor anything happening to him. After all, he still had things to learn.